All right, so this is going to be the biblical Exodus fully explained, and we're going to show how the whole entire thing happened and how you can prove that the whole entire thing happened. And despite the fact this is all going to be science, this isn't to say necessarily that this science wasn't being, guided by an unseen hand or anything like that. So, because you'll see throughout the course of this description that the ancient Hebrews just kept getting so ridiculously lucky, so many times on so many occasions that it kind of like defies probability, and it suggests that something a little more peculiar was going on. But anyway, so this all of the big ticket items of the Exodus event were all caused by a magnetic excursion event. All right, and this is where, normally Earth's magnetic field is just over us. Like if this is the Earth down here, then Earth's magnetic field is just over us in layers, like a protective shield. But sometimes there are, on very rare occasions, like many thousands of years apart, you have turmoil inside the Earth, geologic, tectonic, seismological upheaval going on inside the planet. And what it does is it causes the magnetic field to become distorted. See, normally we have like convection currents and things down here creating the normal magnetic field. But sometimes if there's a major disruption, it will actually distort the magnetic field and cause it to be dented inwards, like a giant divot. Oh, and another good point, as I'm explaining how all this works, this is all very simple science. So you don't need to trust some official fancy scientist in an ivory tower to tell you or confirm any of this to you, or some influencer or something. You can literally look all of this up for yourself and see that it's real. Like, you don't need anyone to tell you that this is real, and it's all so simple and so common sense that, again, you don't need anyone to confirm this for you. I'm basically going to show you that the sky is blue. Like, that's how obvious it is that the biblical Exodus event actually did happen. But anyway, I just wanted to make that point. Like, you don't need to be intimidated by this. You can look this up. This is very, very simple. These happen. The last one that happened besides the Exodus was around the time that the Neanderthal disappeared and just kind of vanished. So these are real, they do happen, and this is what they do. They cause these weakenings in the Earth's magnetic field like this, which kind of, if you plotted it out, is like a divot or a dent, if you will, or a depression or a trough. And so if these troughs are significant enough, they will allow the solar wind from the sun, like charged particles, really highly energetic particles, to come blasting down through the center there and expose us to like basically a column of high energy particles coming down and just like burning into the atmosphere. But what's also interesting about this is this is how the auroras are made in the North and South Pole. It's because the Earth's magnetic field is dented in like this up there, of course, at the North and South Pole, it's like fully dented in all the way into the Earth. Like at the North and South Pole, of course, the field is like fully dented into the Earth. And so what you have is whenever charged particles from the sun or from the cosmos come blasting at us through space, what they do is they get into the magnetic field, and just the natural phenomenon that happens when an ion enters into a magnetic field is it just starts to spiral around the lines of flux. Like it doesn't allow the charged particle, when the field gets strong enough, it doesn't allow the charged particle to keep going through it perpendicularly. It just forces it to like spiral. So, and this is real simple stuff you can look up, and you don't have to memorize any of this, but charged particles come in, they get into where the field is really intense, and they get stuck, and they spiral, and they can move laterally along the field all they want, but just not perpendicularly to it. So what happens is they get funneled into the atmosphere, and then they come colliding into the Earth's atmosphere, and they effectively burn up. They just come smashing into the atmosphere as a very high energy particle and then burn up. And this is where we get the aurora lights. We get these big aurora lights in the north and in the south. And so whenever you have a magnetic excursion event, you start to get these auroras popping up in just like random places around the world. And again, these can be like very localized. Like you can have something like this just popping up in like one specific spot and nowhere else. It doesn't necessarily have to be all over the globe all at the same time. So anyway, so this is what happened in the Exodus. You had a very pronounced weakening in the Earth's magnetic field in that area. So this would be like, if we were looking at the Earth, this would be like kind of like Sinai and like the Red Sea and stuff. All that sort of thing. And you would have this dent in the magnetic field right above that area. And like this would be Egypt and stuff with like the Nile going out. And that's what I was drawing up here with these blue lines, because I wanted a nice big version of this. So basically, let's see if I can erase this. All right, so you had the Earth's magnetic field dented in above this Red Sea area. And I guess let's just say that this is the Earth. And this is a very controversial issue, where exactly the location of the Red Sea crossing was. But just for argument's sake, we're going to say that it was around the Straits of Tiran, which is, if this is Sinai, I feel like this is the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, and this is Arabia over here, and this is like Africa and like Egypt. This is like, you got the Nile feeding Egypt over here. And this is all the Red Sea. The Straits of Tiran is this crossing right here. And this could be a really good crossing point, because there's underneath the water, there's a relatively shallow land bridge in this area. And that could have been exposed much more easily. And in ancient times, this land bridge apparently was even more continuous. So that's just like a really easy place for something that splits the ocean apart to do so. Because once you go back in here, it's like the Grand Canyon. Like people would be like practically having to scale down the sides of cliffs to go across the bottom of the sea down there. But, anyway, this is a big discussion, so we're just gonna place it right here at the Straits of Tiran. That's Tiran as in Tiran. So, and another point too, which is interesting about this, is if, let's say, theoretically, hypothetically, the whole point of the Exodus beginning was to like lure Pharaoh into a trap so you could get him. If you tried to put this somewhere else, like, in some of the lake areas in Upper Egypt or something that people have speculated, it wouldn't be a very good trap, because if you were splitting a lake apart, you could just go around the lake, But especially if it had because they said there was also like this giant column of clouds that came between them and the Egyptian army. So, which is basically like a tornado, is what they're describing. So if you had like this lake like weirdly split apart and then like tornadoes in it, and you were chasing these guys, you would not want to follow them into that crazy weird lake, like a freaking split apart lake with tornadoes in it. You would just say, go around, or you would send like part of your troops around, and then once you did, you would get them. So I guess I could just draw that up here. All right. I'm gonna try to draw the So, like if, can you see that? Yeah. Like if this is the Nile River, and this is like the Red Sea here, what we're looking at, you got like Sinai here, the tip, and the Straits of Tiran would be right here. People have proposed crossing sites like up here and like in the lake areas up here and stuff. But again, like they all have that same issue with the fact that they wouldn't make super great traps, ostensibly, because you could just go around. But like here, there's a bunch of mountains in here, and you can't just follow the coastline up. And even if you did, it would take forever, because this is a long, long way. So if the crossing was at a place like this, that would be a perfect trap, because you would really have no choice but to try and follow them through that gap into this area over here. This area has a bunch of mountains and stuff. Right there, so this is this right here. So what happens, again, with a magnetic excursion event is you would have these dips right here, and a ton of like aurora fire would be coming down in here. These charged particles would just be pouring down into this during, if you caught it at the right moments that you happen to witness this, you would actually see the aurora pouring into those bowls like that, and you would see central column of solar wind coming down here, and or cosmic rays. More solar wind if it's towards the daytime, and more of the cosmic rays if it's towards the nighttime. but it would be blasting down through that center there where it was the weakest and just burning into the atmosphere. And so it would be a literal column of fire, just like they explained they saw, just like they said they saw during the Exodus event. They said they saw a column of fire, and they followed it around. But it was also the column of fire that was doing a whole bunch of other stuff too. Because if you have all that intense solar energy just pouring down into this, especially during the daytime, what it's doing is it's creating a bunch of heat down here. Like it's just blasting down and creating a bunch of heat. And that heat, of course, is creating a bunch of pressure. And that pressure is going to be pushing out on everything. This is simple physics. Heat makes pressure, pressure pushes out. And so this would actually be like the opposite of a hurricane. Because in a hurricane, what happens, like let's just say we had a hurricane over here. In a hurricane, like you've got those real low temperatures. I'm gonna do a generic hurricane. And it's like spinning around, in this giant weather system. And you've got this like, centrifuge at the core creating a vacuum. And it's also cold, so cold makes lower pressure. So you'd have low pressure from the cold and from the centrifuge effect creating a vacuum. And that low pressure over the ocean, this is what hurricanes do. They cause the ocean to like bulge up into that vacuum area. And then, they've got really intense winds that kind of like offset the bulge and blow it up even higher, just like push the water even higher. And then a really intense hurricane like this, it's literally sucking the ocean out. This is called a storm surge. Sorry, I just want to make sure I enunciate that very well. It's a storm surge. For those of us who didn't grow up in areas with this kind of stuff. And what this will do when a major hurricane makes landfall is it'll just like literally drag the ocean onto the land with it. And then it'll like flood a whole area out, and it's a pretty dramatic thing to experience, to see the building you were just in now like completely covered in water, and you're up in the even higher building hoping it doesn't come up any higher. It's pretty wild. So yeah, that's what hurricanes do. And it's simple. This is very simple physics. And again, you don't need to trust anyone else or wait around for someone to confirm this to you. This is your birthright, this science and understanding. But anyway, magnetic excursion event over water does precisely the opposite. It creates a really high pressure system, and that high pressure just crushes down the ocean. It just like pushes down everything. So it does the exact opposite of the hurricane. I'm trying to think like how best to draw this. But yeah, so it just like, let's say it was over here, so I can make this more clear. It just like crushes down the ocean with all of that pressure. And all right, so this would be like the 2D profile if we were looking at it from the side. It would be like a massive bowl shape. Again, the opposite of the hurricane. So just crushing down the ocean. And then you have a bunch of really powerful wind coming out, and that wind is, going to be like dragging the water out even harder, and pulling the bowl down even lower. So between the pressure and the wind, you could crush the ocean down pretty significantly. And in probably like a sort of a medium strength magnetic excursion event, you're probably looking at about a 5-story deep depression in the ocean like this. So like a person would just be like a tiny little speck, not even that big, just like a little bitty speck down there. If you were like crushing the ocean down about 5 stories deep like this. And if that happened at the Straits of Tiran, let's see, I'm wondering if I could draw this, but in like more of a 3D angled view, because I didn't plan to do this, but it's just kind of happening. So in a more 3D view, like the ocean would be just sort of like pressed out in a giant bowl shape. And so you'd have all this like, so this would be like a giant bowl here in the ocean, just like crushed in. And this, you'd have a bunch of like land in here that was exposed. This like, you know, land bridge they talk about. And then this would all like, this area would be water, but it would be like a bowl, you know, or like one of those big, you know, skate park bowls. And so you would have a bunch of wind blowing out of this as well as this was happening, and that wind would be carrying up like a huge amount of moisture with it. And let's see here. And that moisture would be forming a bunch of like massive cumulonimbus clouds over this area. And then you'd have like the central portal oculus over here where it was blasting through. So that wind would be, I'm skipping ahead. So the wind would be, that hot air, this would be a ton of hot air in here. And what it would want to do is actually go back up, you know, because it's hot air, so it wants to go back up. And so what it would do is whenever you have like one big parcel of air that wants to go from point A to point B, usually it's something high up that wants to go down really fast, or something on the bottom that wants to get up really fast. It can't obviously just trade places with the air above it. So what it has to do is it has to find like a breach somewhere and then start like flowing through that breach. And when that happens and you get all this fluid rushing towards that opening, that channel, it just naturally starts to spin. And this is how we get things like tornadoes. You know, it's just a bunch of air of one temperature trying to go through a channel, and it's just spinning into it. So all of this like really hot, warm, moist air, like all around this is gonna wanna like be going back up. And so naturally what it's going to do, again, like just pulling a cork out of a bathtub, is it's going to be spinning up. And it's gonna form these like giant, we call these water spouts, but you know, you can call them tornadoes or whirlwinds, anything but late for supper. And these bad boys would be creating some like enormous cumulonimbus clouds up here above this area. These like giant anvil top clouds that go up and just like smash into the top of the troposphere at the inversion layer up here. So, mingle our diagrams here. All right, so you would have the ocean splitting apart in a giant bowl, exposing a land bridge, and then you'd have these like giant water spout tornadoes, whirlwinds just blasting up, creating like massive cumulonimbus clouds in the area. And this is exactly what they said came between them and the Egyptian army, you know, a column of clouds. So in this scenario, they would have been crossing from here to here, and then, you know, Pharaoh, when he caught up to them, would have been trying to chase them in here. But one of these bad boys just like came right in between them. And actually, probably wouldn't be quite that wide on this scale. It's probably a little bit on the wide side, but still, it would be a pretty big beast. But all right, so I'm trying to think. There's like so many different things going on that. All right, so these clouds here would be, this is actually the third time I'm doing this whole lecture over, so that's why I'm not in such a fluid flow anymore, because like the audio got screwed up twice, so this is like the third tedious version of this. But anyway, so you'd have these massive clouds over here, and you've also got this like nice big sort of mountain range over here. You've got all these like mountains along this area here, and this elevation over here is actually a lot higher, so I don't know if we could represent that very well, but this is like a plateau that's a lot higher than the seaward facing side. So this area up here is like significantly elevated compared to the beach side, and this is the high desert over here. And so what you would have happening with these enormous clouds over here is they would be drifting out over the desert. They'd be drifting out in multiple directions, but what would happen with this thing is, as the sun rose in the east every day and went to the west, those sun rays would be coming down through this portal here, and like a, you know, right through the middle, like a beam. And as the sun traversed across the sky, that beam would be like sweeping across this area. So it would actually be coming down over here and then just like traveling across like that. And that sweeping effect of that beam, that's where it would be crushing the ocean down. So it would start on this side, on the, which way are we? On the west side, and just crushing it down and then going across slowly throughout the day. And then, you know, so this would be the first side to start closing up as you were, you know, if you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, chasing these guys into this thing, in this location, it would just start closing up at the end of the day and just like crush you. And if, you know, if it's like 5 stories deep or there on that order, you know, that would not be a good time. That would kill most people. But all right, so that sweeping effect, as it was doing that, that would help to give this moisture more of an eastwardly push to it in this cloud system. So it kind of helped to like nudge it out further into the desert. And in this area, the prevailing winds now, which were probably more or less the same back then, because this, geologically speaking, this was not that long ago. It was like 3,600 years ago, so that's like 3 seconds ago in geology time. So you'd probably have the same sort of gentle north to south prevailing winds that come through here that kind of can have a little bit of their own eastward angle sometimes. And so if you mix those two vectors together, then you would have this big cloud system that was kind of like arcing out over the desert in a sort of southeast arc like that. Like, let me draw this over here, if this is on screen. So it'd be kind of like arcing that out into the desert like that. More or less. And so this would be providing them an enormous amount of shade. And that's exactly what they described they had. They said that they were always beneath the clouds of glory, and it was giving them shade out there. And so, you know, that's always been a mystery. Like, how do you have, you know, clouds of glory? And people have just kind of accepted it as a miracle. But that's where you get your clouds of glory from. And they said whenever the shade from the clouds of glory would move, they would pick up their camp and just move with it. So they were following all of these things. They were following a column of fire in the sky at night, because that's when you would see this. You wouldn't see this in the day because of the brightness. You would only see this at night. They were following a column of fire in the sky at night and a column of clouds in the day, and they were following the clouds of glory whenever those would move. So this is, if you saw these bad boys from a distance, these could look like your columns of clouds, but also this system, as it's coming out over the desert over here, it's also going to be raining. So it's going to be dumping a huge amount of rain onto these watersheds over here, onto these mountains. And that rain, you know, a bunch of it's going to be pouring off in this direction and forming like new rivers, but a bunch of it is going to be pouring off in that direction too. And this is going to be providing them like a huge amount of fresh drinking water. And this has always been a big mystery. Like, how do you have even 10,000 people out here, much less the 2 or 3 million that they said were out here, you know, in this, you know, God-forsaken desert. And if you've ever been out in one of these deserts, this one or one like this, or all of them, in the summer, you know, I would call it that. I mean, it's just terrible. The heat, it's deadly, but it's like literally being in an oven. But yeah, so you would need a ton of water, and that's always just been this total, you know, unknown. How in the world where did they get all that water from? And people have tried to figure it out and come up with all these theories, like maybe there's an aquifer or something, and they just could never, no one's ever been able to like find anything to answer that, but the answer is very straightforward. This bad boy, just raining out, you know, just dumping a bunch of rain onto this mountain range. And so, oh yeah, that's why I mentioned that. So if you see a bunch of rain coming down at a distance, that can also look like a giant column of clouds. So that could have been another thing they observed, that to them, they perceived like a column of clouds that would move around. Because this system, they were following it for 40 years out here in the high desert, or in the wilderness, as they said. And it was basically, this system was like following the coast most of the time. And that's how it was providing them with all of this fresh drinking water in these clouds, because it was sticking to the coast. And that in itself is a very fascinating little point there, or not so little point. And yeah. So let's see here. I'm going to jump now to Mount Sinai. People have been looking for this place, Mount Sinai, and you know, it's very controversial where exactly this could be, and you know, a lot of the newer research has been suggesting it's like over here somewhere, or maybe out in this area somewhere. And I don't know, just let me put it over here just for the fun of it. So at Mount Sinai, they said a huge like storm gathered around it. And then a bunch of fire from heaven just started like blasting down onto it. All that heavenliness. Just a bunch of fire from heaven started, trying to remember the exact words they used, just like descending down upon it. And you had all these storms around it, and then you had some like wicked lightning coming down here, just like blasting into the mountain. And it says that also Moses got like a heads up a few days in advance to like put up some like barricades, some like concert barricades, so that people wouldn't get too close and get a little too much fun. And so can you see that very well? And once this was happening, it said like a smoke began to rise up from the mountain, and then the mountain itself began to rumble, and then they heard this like really heavy horn sound, just like brrrr. And I'm not gonna beat around the bush with this. I think you can even figure this out yourself. That fire from heaven was this fire from this heaven, and it just had drifted out here, not even very far from like this area to like this area. So it had just drifted out to Mount Sinai and, you know, blasted it. And, you know, whenever that heat energy, like that radiant heat energy and that direct thermal infrared energy was just blasting into those geology layers in the mountain, that like sudden heating of that strata could absolutely cause like a heavy rumbling and a seismic shaking. In fact, it would be kind of crazy if it didn't cause that effect. Like if you just had like this really intense heat just suddenly like blasting right on to this these mineral layers like that. And as far as the resonance, that sounded like a really heavy horn. That could just simply be this system hitting a resonance in the atmosphere, or like at the inversion layer or something. You know, just nature is full of resonance, and if you hit one of those points, you know, you get vibration. So anyway, I'm not going to over-explain that. It's really straightforward. There's your Mount Sinai event. You know, it's not as much of a mystery as it has seemed. But anyway, so but it also says that years later that they were 40 years later, they were leaving the wilderness back over here, like over in this area, because you've got like if that's the River Jordan up here, they were leaving the wilderness, crossing the River Jordan, and going to the fortress city of Jericho. And they said that at Jericho, they had to they were instructed to walk around it for, I don't know, 7 days, I think it was. And then at the end of that, they had to just stop and start blowing their horns and shouting all together at once. And then the walls of Jericho, famously crumbled down. But again, I'll give you one guess what really caused those walls to crumble down. This bad boy, if this was in the daytime over the Jericho area, which would have been way back over here, I'll just draw that oversized back there so we could see it, way back over there, zoomed in if we had eagle vision looking at Jericho back there. if this system was in that area, like behind Jericho, where they maybe couldn't really see it that well, but it had drifted out there like really fast, it would have gotten ahead of its clouds that it was kind of bringing around with it. Or if maybe it went overland for a while, then it wouldn't even have the clouds with it. And so like it would just drift out here, like in the vicinity, try to put some crosshairs, and just start blasting down in the daytime. And without these clouds around it, making it dark underneath, in the daytime, you wouldn't really see this column of fire. The reason they saw it at Mount Sinai is because you had all these like really heavy duty clouds around the area, making it really dark. They like specifically said it was like really dark underneath and cloudy. And so that's why you would perceive that fire from heaven at that point. But at Jericho, without these clouds creating that darkness in the daytime, you would have just had this beam. And they might have perceived it as like an intense beam of like just regular sunlight, if they even noticed it at all with all the drama that was already going on. They probably weren't really paying attention to much other things around them like that. But yeah, this sucker would have just hit a resonance in that area and just crumbled down Jericho, exactly like it hit a resonance over here at Mount Sinai. Just the same exact system moving out there. So again, like very straightforward answers to all of this stuff. And let's see here. So a few days after Jericho, trying to think which thing I want to talk about next. A few days after Jericho, they were having an issue with the Amorites, apparently, and it says that I guess like the Amorite force was like way too much for them to handle, but it says that a bunch of like stones from heaven came and just like fell down and like crushed the Amorites. And this has been one of the things that's been used to dismiss all of this and debunk it. Not that I've been for or against any of it, I've been completely neutral about all of this stuff. Like I'm just on team truth, that's all I care about. And so, but that's been used to debunk this. And Jericho itself has been used to debunk this because the archaeology shows that at the time period they say they were doing this at Jericho, that no such thing was happening. And it's very clear that there was no such thing going down at that period that they say. But a fellow by the name of Timothy P. Mahoney, who I am not endorsing necessarily, I'm just referencing him. Timothy P. Mahoney, in his documentaries, he went around and just interviewed tons of experts, and after all, you can go watch it yourself, after all of his hard work that he did, his amazing work that he did, he found through all of these experts, and like specific ones in particular, that if you just move the dates of the Exodus back a couple centuries, suddenly you have everything. Like all the archaeology is there. It shows the Jericho being crumbled down like that. It shows like the stuff going on in Egypt, like the sudden disappearance of a massive slave population essentially, and like the story of Joseph and all that, and how, because Joseph, back in the day, came from the land of Canaan over here, got sold into slavery in Egypt, and a bunch of like larger than life stuff happened that's easy to pretend didn't happen, or just think just ancient people trying to tell tales out of school. But like what he found is like all of the archaeology for all of that stuff is there, but you just have to move the dates back a couple centuries. You just have to have a little bit of humility, which is what the future is going to be about, just humility, which isn't to say like weak or subservient or like any of that, or like groveling sycophants or something. It's just humility, just not being too overly obsessed with like vanity and stuff. But yeah, I'm not trying to like give a moral lecture or anything. I'm just saying like, because I've dealt with a lot of hardliners, which is why I'm saying this. But yeah, if you just move the dates back a couple centuries and just admit that, you know, there could have been a, you know, little fumble at some point in the information. I mean, this has been passed down for thousands of years, so it's not a big deal if there was a little bit of a, you know, a mishap somewhere and someone forgot to dot an I or cross a T right or something. But anyway, and you know, if you want to get even deeper, you could say, you know, this has been deliberately concealed from us, specifically so it could all come out at once and be revealed in just one big awesome revelation. But anyway, so that's how you get Jericho back, is you just move the dates. And that's how you get your Joseph story and all the others, the slave story and everything. And that's also how you get this, because it's not on the map here, but this happens with really heavy duty seismological activity and like inner earth upheaval. And so when that happens, you get earthquakes, you get volcanoes and all sorts of stuff. So that's how we would be able to pinpoint when this happened, is by a bunch of really tumultuous activity. And that's exactly what we see a couple centuries prior to the believed dates of the Exodus. Just move the dates back, and then there's this like huge spike in seismological activity. You had the volcano across the Med up to the north, just south of Greece a little, on the island of Thera or Santorini. You had the Minoan eruption, and that beast, like, it was believed to be the most percussive event ever experienced by human beings in all of history. So it was a extremely powerful volcano that just went off up there, and that, again, that's totally indicative, obviously, of major geological upheaval going on, you know, geologic turmoil, tumult. But so again, that's from moving the dates back a couple centuries. You get Jericho, you get all your archaeology, you get your magnetic excursion event, and your magnetic excursion event gives you all your big ticket items in Exodus, and it's all right there. And that's all kind of building up to where I was going with this, which was that the story of the stones from heaven falling on the Amorites and crushing them, that's another thing that's been used to just dismiss all of this. And because, you know, like the largest record-breaking hailstones ever are like maybe softball grapefruit size, and you know, like that's the stuff like that has fallen on huge crowds of people and barely caused any injuries, much less, you know, killed anybody, much less, you know, the effect that would have on a bunch of like really big battle-hardened men with shields and stuff. I mean, it wouldn't do anything really, except spoil their picnic. But stones from heaven that could really mess you up like that would also be caused by this. That's exactly what this system would do. And that would have happened, you know, like over here somewhere with the battle with the Amorites. But if this system had just, after Jericho, if it had just drifted out here, like just off the coast a little, over to this location, hopefully that's still on screen. It's probably like almost off screen. If it had just drifted out there and fired up and started pushing, I'm gonna pretend like this is over there now, and started pushing a bunch of that hot, moist air up, like extra intensely, those updrafts would also be sucking in a bunch of the air from the land. So it could be pulling in a bunch of land air with it. And that land air could have a bunch of dust in it, you know? And that dust would be really helpful to function as condensation nuclei, which is like like if you were to zoom in on a little micro scale, it's just like little specks of, impurities in the air, little colloids or whatever, and that allows little water molecules to stick to it. Can you see that? And those allow more water molecules to stick to them, and so on and so forth. And it just keeps building up and building up until it causes a full raindrop. And again, this is like if we're zoomed in on it. But anyways, it's just like impurities in the air, allows water to stick to it, causes a raindrop. If that gets cold, or if the weather conditions are cold or higher up in the troposphere, that causes a snowflake. Or if the conditions are really intense, it causes a hailstone. And so there's already plenty of condensation nuclei in the marine air as it is, like out here. But it would especially help if that was like near the land. It could just suck up a bunch of dust too. And so with all of that dust and the condensation nuclei and all that moisture is being blasted up into the atmosphere, especially if it did it like extra intensely, like just for a spell, then it could blast it even to like record breaking, like even beyond like the normal limits. It could just like crush it like all the way up, and that absolutely would create like massive hailstones, no question. Like this is not like reaching or ancient aliens or I don't know or anything like that. This is just what would happen, very simple and straightforward. So you just blast all this stuff up with this system, and it creates a bunch of enormous, like oversized hailstones. And then those beasts would just get like arced out onto the land over here. And yeah, suffice to say, you would not want to be wherever those bad boys were coming down, because again, this could easily create hailstones like the size of boulders and beach balls and stuff. So yeah, that would and again, like it wouldn't matter what kind of shield you had. If something the size of a beach ball came down on you, yeah, that would be a bad day. But anyway, I'm over explaining that, but very straightforward explanation. So it doesn't require any hand waving, any magic, any like, well, if conditions were just right, it's like it's well within the realm of a likelihood under these conditions. So that gives you your Jericho, your Amorites. Okay, now, and I just drew that over here because there's nowhere else to draw it, but that would have been happening like way over there. But anyway, so the final thing is a few days after this event with the stones from heaven crushing the Amorite army, there was still a remnant left, as I understand it, and they had to fight them, but they needed more time to finish the battle and to like keep them from being able to retreat and regroup and regather their strength. They needed to like press their advantage. And so what happened is that the story says the sun stood still, the sun and the moon stood still for an entire extra day, so that they had all this extra daylight to finish their battle. And again, people use this as easy fodder to dismiss all of this. But I wonder if I can draw some like water stuff. But that's actually exactly what this system would do if it was firing up extra intensely. The auroras, as they already exist, will already, when they get fired up really intensely, naturally, they can make the night look like it's the evening. They can get that bright. And so during a magnetic excursion event, or what is also referred to as a geomagnetic excursion event sometimes. These auroras could easily fire up to the point of where they turned the night into day. They could literally get that bright. That would not be a stretch or anything. And if you were like, let's say you were like over here, let's just imagine we're in a different location, like we're in the north looking south, and this is Canaan over here. Now if this is Canaan, we'll just like switch our reference, our point of view, and pretend like this is like Canaan, and like the River Jordan over here. And like, I guess this would be Jericho. And then, so if this were like in the north looking south, and this is Canaan over here, and you've got the battle going on. So if they're standing over here having a battle, let me just draw a battle, big battle, bunch of people fighting. It says that like the Canaanites and stuff were really wicked, and so that's like one people's perspective of it all. But sometimes people do. If you're like too isolated from the coast for too long, and you're not getting any brain food, because all of our brain food comes from the marine environment, and sometimes you can get by if like, if there's like, there aren't any rivers like this over here, but like if there are rivers that come up from the sea, and you have like migratory ocean fish, like salmon, coming up to spawn, and you get them, like you can, kind of barely scrape by with your brain food requirements like iodine and DHA. But if you're not even getting that for way too long, then you get the hillbilly effect, and your IQ just starts plummeting, and mental illness starts skyrocketing. And like, you can easily, this has been happening for thousands and thousands of years. Like, we keep repeating this mistake where we don't get that brain nutrition sometimes. We get just too isolated, and we don't realize what we're supposed to be getting. And you get, people start to lose their mind and, go nuts. And, I call it the hillbilly effect. It's basic malnutrition. And that's why, like, if you go in the grocery store now, there's like, the salt will say it's iodized or it's not, just to like inform you what's going on with that. And like, a lot of people take fish oil now as a necessity because, we've kind of like figured out the hard way that the hominin human body has to consume a lot of that marine nutrition. But anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but when it says that these guys were getting really wicked, that's probably like a huge contributing factor about why they might have been like losing their mind over here, because this is pretty far over, pretty isolated over here, and this is like a mountain area. So if they were, they could have been getting malnourished. But anyway, that's way off the beaten path there of what we're talking about. So anyway, if you're over here and this beast just fires up enormously and turns the night into day, but it's up above the clouds over here, all you would really perceive is that you would have this diffuse light coming down from the clouds and from this general area, and it wouldn't be moving. It would just be this light, this really bright light. Like if you mix these colors all together, it would make a something very akin to sunlight, and you would just perceive that it was coming from the same place for an entire extra day, all day, all night, and then all day again. And then you would also notice, because it's so bright, you would not see this column of fire over here off the coast, But you would notice that the base of the clouds over here, the cloud ceiling, was lit up and like luminous and glowing. And from a really far distance over here, that luminous area at the base of the clouds would very much appear like it was the moon. It would have a very like lunar appearance to it. So as far as you were concerned from this perspective over here, it very much would look as though the sun and the moon were standing still. And this, again, this is the simplest thing in the world. If you just know about this really straightforward natural phenomenon that you could look up in 30 seconds. And you don't have to trust anybody. You can see the proof for yourself. You can hold that truth within you and have it for your own. That's one of the big points I'm trying to make on this third iteration of this lecture. You don't have to trust anybody. And a lot of ancient people actually saw this, these events in the distant past. And they saw it at just the right time, so that they were at just the right time and just the right perspective to see those aurora fires just blasting down into these bowls and that central fire. And this has been, I want to be careful how I say this, but let's just say this has been associated with other gods or other cultures' version of God, we could say. Like this has been associated with the multi-armed depictions of God, referred to by names like Vishnu and Krishna, and the Nagas with their snake heads around them, and then like that kind of trickling into other cultures and giving you like the Greek Medusa. But like your Vishnus and your Krishnas, they're not bad like Medusa. They're the opposite. They're like protector spirits, if you want to call them that. But you might also recognize this shape here if you're from Western civilization, because this is the menorah. So the menorah, we like to call this the aurora system, but you could also call it the menorah system too. But this is what caused all the most cinematic stuff of the Exodus, not counting the plagues and the burning bush. And it says that, it doesn't say that they saw this, like some of the ancient cultures that even like drew this on cave walls, because it just, obviously if you see this in your lifetime, it's gonna melt your brain and you're gonna be like, wow. So like some ancient cultures witnessed this and drew this on cave walls, these events. But so this is a big deal, but it doesn't say in the Exodus story that they actually saw that. It just talks about the column of fire. It doesn't talk about the bowls. And so they might have just not been able, from wherever they were, to see that they might have just never been in the right place at the right time to see the bowls. But what it does say, when they were like camping out here, they had like their camps and stuff, their tabernacle and all that stuff. What it does say is that God told Moses how to make the menorah. And apparently, I think it's the rabbinical traditions say that like he kept getting it wrong, so he kept having to correct him to do it over and over. And it's like it was very important that it be done right. And one might imagine why that would be the case when you realize that the menorah is an exact scientific diagram of the natural phenomena that caused that entire event. So there you go. So that's all of that. what else have we left out? So, there was the burning bush. Before any of this happened, when Moses was living in the land of Midian, which all the biggest evidence suggests is out here, and he came to, I believe, Mount Horeb, as it says, which was also supposed to be Mount Sinai later on, same mountain, I think. And when he was living out here, before any of this happened, before the plagues of Egypt or anything, like right before, not long before, but like soon before that started, he, as the story goes, he saw a burning bush. But let me see if I can draw this. I'm just going to draw that over here. Well, it says, for those who are not familiar with this story, it says that he saw a burning bush, but it wasn't burning. Like, it was on fire, but the flames were not consuming the bush. And again, this is one thing that people use to just write all of this off and say that, he accidentally ingested some mushrooms or something. But what happens is, whenever you have major seismic activity, you get a lot of like layers of the earth like grinding against one another, like a giant Van de Graaff generator. And a very common thing that happens is that it causes a bunch of electric charge to be displaced, to go in different directions, and it'll actually send a huge surge of electric charge up into the surface of the earth, and that charge will go to like high locations. It'll just like rush into like mountaintops and stuff. I'm trying to draw little plus symbols in here. Like if it happened right in this area, you would just have all this electric charge just like rushing into these mountaintops. And then when it gets into a mountaintop, we're gonna like zoom in on that and put a mountaintop over here. Bunch of electric charge that is just like rushed up into this mountaintop. And this is how you get really eerie phenomena like earthquake lights, which are like very strange and once considered inexplicable, but still a lot of sources will say we don't know why and how it's happening, but I don't want to get off into earthquake lights, but that's one of the things that happens with all this. But when this charge rushes into high places, it will also seek out the things in those places that are the most like antennas. So if like you had if you were out here in this mountain range, there's not a lot going on out here in terms of like, foliage or whatever. And, but you do have some sparse thorn bushes on these mountains. And if you had a nice green thorn bush up there, that would be the perfect little antenna for that charge to rush into. And when that charge is intense enough from that seismic activity down there beneath the earth, and this is already a very seismically susceptible area. There's like a bunch of volcanic cones and stuff out in this area. But so this would have been one of those places, kind of like a volcano, where it would have been like extra susceptible to the effects of seismic activity within the earth. But anyway, it would have rushed into that thorn bush up on that mountain. And then once the charge is intense enough, it'll actually burst out of the antenna object. It just like blasts out of it. And we have a name for this. It's called St. Elmo's Fire. And St. Elmo's Fire is like this really cool, like ghostly sapphire blue. It's really cool to witness. And what's interesting about it is the charge is trying to get out into the air itself. It's not like lightning where it's like charge in one reservoir trying to arc into another reservoir. This charge is just trying to get out into the air, and that's why it creates a fire effect. It's electrical fire rather than just an electrical arc. But because it is electrical fire, if you were over here and you were wearing your sandals and your name was Moses, you would be electrically insulated from the ground. So you would be like this perfect little reservoir of 70% water that's at, neutral as far as your electrical potential was concerned. And so this high voltage over here, if you got too close to it, it would want to equalize your reservoir with it. So it would jump out and arc into you like a bolt of lightning. It would strike you and, to equalize your electrical potential with it. It would just like hit you like that. And so if you had sandals on, that would be a major safety hazard. But it specifically says in the story that, God told him to take his sandals off. And again, that's a really fascinating detail because, that's exactly what you would need to do in that scenario. And, it says, in the story says, like, he was told to take his sandals off because the ground on which he was standing was holy. But also because if you didn't, that could have been the Exodus before the Exodus even started. But anyway, that's your burning bush. It's St. Elmo's fire. And St. Elmo's fire, electrical fire like that, it doesn't burn the structure that it's erupting off of. Like if he was standing there without his sandals on and he was like he got close enough, it would start to come out of him too, out of his hands. So he would have had fire hands if he got close enough, which would have just like added to the mystique of it all. And yeah, it would not be burning his hands. It would just be like erupting out of his hands, which is kind of a trippy phenomenon that it's like fire, but it's not burning you. But anyway, there's your burning bush that doesn't burn. It's caused by seismic activity, just like all of this is caused by seismic activity. And there was even a fellow out here in the wilderness by the name of Korah. And he was rebelling against Moses, giving him a hard time. Even after everything Moses had done for them, they still lacked faith. And but Korah and his rebels, as the story goes, the earth just opened up beneath all their tents, where they all were camped. And the earth just opened up and just like swallowed everybody. Like they all just like fell into the earth. And again, that's like an oddly specific story, but it doesn't take much imagination to see what that's all about. That's just more seismic activity. But let's see what else. And the final thing here, so this is all my contribution to this whole, like, solving all of this, and plus Timothy P. Mahoney's contribution of identifying the archaeology, and him and the experts he interviewed, all of them together, their team, and then, also, this is not my contribution, but I will tell it to you anyway. We'll like switch our reference over here back to Egypt. And we'll just like, we'll sort of zoom over the horizon just a little bit to where we can like see the Nile Delta, where the Nile comes out. And so back in the land of Egypt, before, so Moses has this experience with the burning bush. He gets told he needs to like basically go back and free his people to just get his people out of there. But then what happens next is, in the story you have all of these plagues that happened in the land of Egypt, and these have been a big mystery too, but I'll reference another fellow here. Okay, you got Simcha Jacobovici. Pretty sure I got all the vowels right. Because of his awesome work and others, it's been identified that the plagues of Egypt would be caused by seismic activity too. And he never said it, but I'll fill in the gaps here. To be more specific, other than just seismic activity, it's actually limnic eruptions. At least I don't think he said it, but it's specifically limnic eruptions that cause the water turning into blood, as they said. Let's see, is that on screen? Yeah, you can see that. So since I'm using red, I'll just turn it into blood over here. But limnic eruptions are basically when you have gases inside the earth coming up from geologic activity. Gases like just simple CO2, they come into a lake, and I'll do like a three-dimensional version of this lake. It's sort of like this is down underneath the earth, and then this lake feeds like the Nile. This is one way, this isn't the only way, but this is like one way this could have happened. But you've got these geologic gases coming up into the lake, and then they dissolve into the water, just like CO2 is dissolved into your soda. And but with these lakes in tropical regions, like at around about this latitude and down, this is where you're moving into your tropical regions over here. And in these regions, the lakes stay kind of stagnant because you don't have that like cold in the winter to cause like the top layer to like fall down and cause the whole thing to like cycle through. So they just kind of stay really stagnant and stratified. And so what happens if you have geological gases coming up and dissolving into the water is they just kind of like stay down here in this like really cold layer down there deep beneath the surface, which you can feel for yourself. You can be out in the middle of summer in a lake and dive way down and you don't even have to get too far down before you can feel that it's getting like really cold down there. But yeah, if you go down far enough, it's some really cold water, even in a tropical area. But and this is just limnic eruptions. None of this is sci-fi or anything. These are very easy things to look up and see for yourself. But the gases come up and they dissolve into the water, and they just keep building up into higher and higher concentrations until something like a landslide or an earthquake rattles it loose, like kind of shaking the soda, and it causes those gases to just like explode out in like a huge fountain. But because it's still really cold, that huge fountain that just like explodes up, then just like falls back down and like goes into the path of least resistance in whatever direction that is, like downstream. Like especially if these lakes are inside sort of like kind of like valley areas, it would want to like go down the valley. And so you would have that mixing of the gases with the water, which would cause like iron compounds in the water that would turn it blood red, that happens in these events. And then that blood red water would make its way down, and then sometime later, all of that that cold mist that came out would make its way down too, especially if this was in the winter, and that cold mist displaces the oxygen, and if you're in that mist, it just suffocates you to death. And so in Egypt, according to Simcha, the eldest children, because they got favored as the eldest, they got to have their own little bed down by the floor, like a cot. And then the younger children had to sleep on things like tables and on the roof of the house and stuff, which was actually a very common thing in the ancient world, to sleep on the roof of a house, because you wanted to be up away from like the creepy crawlies of the night and all that stuff. But maybe like hearkening back to sleeping in trees. But anyway, so the eldest children would have been closer to the floor, basically, from what he's saying. And so that as that mist came down, that like that killer mist came down the valley, it would have like killed a disproportionately high number of eldest children, as it came through there, like the angel of death. And it sadly does this. It has done this. These events have happened and had that exact effect. And that's one way it could have happened. It also could have just been coming up, not even building up over time like that necessarily, but even just like coming up like in another location, like over here, just from like new fissures underground forming, and like, could have just been happening all at once, in areas like that. But either way, they described it like very, very specifically, and that's what gives it away. Like this whole thing is described way too specifically, and that's why this is all a dead giveaway that this really did happen. It's like that saying, like it's you can't make this up, or it's stranger things have happened. It's what do they call it? Strange but true. But that's the point of it all. Is like this is like a giant fingerprint and like a key, like all matching at exactly the same time. It's just way too like specific about phenomena that they would have had no idea about back in this day and age. But I'm trying to think if I left anything out. But yeah, that's your whole entire Exodus, save one single thing that I didn't talk about. And if you're interested, if you want to keep watching, then I can talk about that too. The only thing I didn't talk about was manna from heaven. And it says that when they were out here in the wilderness, like following this system around, that manna from heaven would fall overnight with a little bit of moisture, and it would come in a sort of envelope, essentially. And it would, but if you left it out in the heat of the day, then it would start to melt and turn into water. But it also came with jewelry, if all of that wasn't strange enough. And what else did they say about it? But you could still take it and like cook it and fry it and bake it and eat it, and it wouldn't melt into water. So that's like an interesting sort of dichotomy. Oh, that's right. They said it was like coriander seeds, which are like these like rough little seeds, like sort of dark colored rough little seeds. But it was also like white bread. So it was all of these strange things all at once. It was like coriander seeds. It was in some sort of like envelope to protect it. It was like white bread. It would melt in the heat of the day. It came with jewelry. Let's see, it could taste like nearly anything except spices. If you just focused on a particular craving while you were eating it, you would perceive that taste of that food. What else? Oh yeah, it would just like completely absorb into your body. Like you would eat it, it would go into your stomach, and then it would just 100% go into your body. just completely absorb. And so it's just like all of these really magical, phenomenal qualities. And so this is a place where everyone universally just, for pretty much for the most part, just kind of throws in the towel and says, well, amidst all of whatever else we can explain, he had to like throw in some like legit magic here and there to, I guess spruce things up. But I'm going to tell you about something, and as I start to get to it, you're gonna, at first you're gonna think it's not quite as ideal as magical manna from heaven, but once I explain more of it, and once you get to know what I'm talking about better, you'll realize that the truth is actually far more amazing. Like, they were telling the truth, by the way. All of those qualities they described were exactly correct. But I'm going to tell you something that it's going to seem not as ideal at first, but the more you get to know about it, the more like phenomenal you realize it really is. But whenever you have these water spouts happening, and these happen all the time, one of the things they do on a sort of random anomalous basis is they will actually pick stuff up out of the marine environment and just hurl it up into the atmosphere, out over the land, into the prevailing winds, out into the land. And like you'll just have like a whole bunch of fish come like raining down on some like poor unsuspecting village, like really far away from the coast. And this is a thing that happens, It sounds strange, it sounds too weird to be true, but this is just a thing that happens. It's easy to look up. These water spouts will just pick a bunch of stuff up and chuck it out into the land somewhere. And it'll be like fish or something. Like, I know a guy in a village in South America, and they like before he knew about anything like about science, like he told me about this time like a bunch of fish rained all over his village. But anyways, like this is recorded all over the place. So, and it's even been in a movie where they depicted a bunch of like frogs raining down on a town. So it's a thing that happens. These water spouts will pick stuff up and chuck it out over into the land, and it's specifically stuff out of the marine environment, like fish. And if you had all of these massive water spouts like sort of meandering around this giant bowl in the ocean, as this like bowl moved along the coast, up and down the coast, the bowl would be exposing the ocean floor and giving these guys direct access, in many cases, right to the ocean floor. And so they would have, like I said, direct physical access to all of that life along the ocean floor. And so it's not even a question of whether or not these things would be sucking up a ton of that aquatic life and hurling it out into the desert. Like, it's not even a question. That would be happening. And so, like if you don't like the idea that the manna from heaven was aquatic life of some sort, you have to still admit that that also would have been happening. So in addition to purely magical, preternatural, Harry Potter manna coming down from heaven from God, or maybe Santa helping him out and just like launching out of his sleigh or something. In addition to that manna, you would also have a ton, not a small amount, no small amount, a massive quantity of marine life being just chucked out into the desert. And what's also fascinating too about this whole thing is that whenever all of this rain was coming down onto these watersheds here, onto these mountains, a huge amount of it would be coming off back down to the ocean. So wherever this thing went, it would actually be causing like a huge bloom of sea life. You know, it would be causing like that all of that marine life in that area to just like explode. You know, with all of that fresh new water coming in and bringing nutrients and things. So this thing would be not just giving them shade, giving them water, and you know, giving them guidance and a bunch of other stuff. It would also be putting massive quantities of marine life down onto the desert. And there is one particular marine organism that precisely matches the description of manna. It comes in a little envelope. The outside of the envelope is rough and dark like a coriander seed. The inside of the envelope is white, and it's don't want to give too much away, but it's iridescent like jewelry. And the Egyptians actually used it to make a lot of their jewelry, that exact same material. Let's see what else. So it comes in an envelope. It's the envelope itself on the outside is like a coriander seed. The inside is iridescent and white like jewelry. So inside of that you have a white wafer that is very analogous to bread, and they're also filled with seawater, so that if you left them out in the heat of the day, they would cook in those hot desert conditions, and they would breach their hermetic seal, and that like pristine, pure brine water would flow out of them, especially if they were out here in large numbers. And that would appear as though they were melting. So you would have all this like water flowing out of them. Let's see, what else? Oh, that's another thing. Oh, but yeah, you could, so they would melt in the sun, but you could still take them and cook them and heat them and fry them and do whatever, and obviously they wouldn't melt under those conditions. Let's see. Oh, that's another thing about manna. It would also go bad in about 24 hours. So that's like a really weird quality of magical heaven food that, you know, this like fancy artisan space bread, that it would just like go bad in about 24 hours. You know, that's pretty peculiar. But if this marine food I'm describing was launched out there like that, which it would have been, undoubtedly that would have been happening, that's exactly what it would do if it was just sitting out there in that extreme heat like that, out of water. In water it's fine, but if you put it out there out of water in that extreme heat, yeah, it would, after about 24 hours it'd probably start to go bad like that. Also, that marine food used to exist around the world by the billions, everywhere around the world, before modern, like semi-modern harvesting, and humans just like going real buck wild with harvesting this particular food in just enormous quantities, like literally mountains of this food. And let's see here. But what's also amazing about this food, this coriander food I'm talking about, is it can and does taste like almost anything, you know, in the like almost any type of food you can imagine, except for spices and that sort of stuff. There are connoisseurs who go all around the world to try the thousands of varieties of this food all around the world. And one of the things that only a person who's doing that would know is that before you try a new version of this food, you don't just cleanse your palate like a wine connoisseur, you also have to cleanse your mind. You have to completely cleanse your mind, because the spectrum of flavors in this food are so broad that you have to be like totally open in order to perceive everything. Because if you're not, and you're just thinking about something in particular, your mind will just zero in on that part of the spectrum of the flavor, and you'll taste that. So, you know, again, this is something that not many people know with this food, but nowadays, not many people know. Yeah, like it can and does taste like almost anything across the spectrum of foods. Like it can taste like, it can have like a honey patina, it can have more of a melony taste, more of a fruity taste, depending on where it was cultivated, how it was cultivated. It can have sort of mineral constituents sometimes, like more of like a coppery or maybe a flinty bit of flavor in it. Like it can have all these different like flavors across the spectrum. And so there again, that's a very explainable quality, which if you didn't know, you would just think was magical. And then finally, with this food I'm describing, it, well, there's more than just one final thing, but this food I'm describing is also the single most perfect food for the human body nutritionally. And to make a long story short, it 100% absorbs when you eat it. It is absolutely perfect nutritionally for the human body. You can literally live off just this food and then some source of vitamin C, like citrus fruits or something like that. If you had that and this food, you could literally live off of that and only that for your entire life and never get any kind of weird deficiencies or problems or anything like that. You could be maximally healthy, you know, trying to think of family-friendly terms. You could be like full throttle healthy your entire life. And this is just 101 nutrition. None of this is like, you know, theoretical or something. This is just simple, basic nutrition of this food I'm describing. I'm trying to think of some of the other aspects of this food that make it just so phenomenal. Oh yeah, that's another thing. This food I'm describing it occurs in the marine environment, you know, that was once around the world by the billions, hundreds of billions of these things all around the planet. It's also non-sentient. So it is a source of meat. It is meat. It is like pure protein. And, you know, like it's, you know, because it's so perfect for the human body, this particular type of meat protein, it does 100% absorb into the human body, which is, another quality that people used to come to New York from all around the world, because New York used to have this type of food I'm describing, that used to have like a massive quantity of this type of food, and it was world famous there. And people would literally come from all around the world to come to New York back in the day, back when the world was still clean, and just consume like prodigious quantities of this stuff. They would just sit down and eat like, effectively like bushels of it. And what people noticed is that you could just put it away, and it was like, where are you putting it? Like you could just consume it, and it would just like keep absorbing into your body. And so there again, that's another like very miraculous quality of this particular marine food I'm describing, which is exactly like the description of manna. And so the final thing that they don't say about manna, but is a feature of this food that I'll mention. You could talk about this food forever. It's so like mind-blowing, like all the stuff you can do with it. But it is pure meat, but it's also completely non-sentient. There's no awareness. There's nothing like that going on. There's no sophistication to it. So it is like I said, the most perfect form of meat for the human body, but it's also completely non-sentient. So it's just like a plant in that respect. So it's as far as the ethics go, it is unequivocally ethical, just unimpeachably ethical. So literally anyone of any persuasion can consume this food and not feel guilty about it, which is kind of what you would expect from, a food that God would rain on you for 40 years, especially with all that brain food in it while you were writing down the Torah for him and all that stuff. Oh, that's another thing, not to get too sidetracked, but and again, I just want to reiterate the point that I'm completely neutral in all of this, but there's a thing that, a practice that apparently was instructed out here, has its origins in this time period where, and you've probably seen people doing this, where they will they will be praying with this little black cube on their head, and then around their arm. Wow, am I off screen? Yeah, I'm going off screen. There would be, like if this was a person's head, they'll be praying with this little black cube on their head, and around their arm. I guess I'll just put their arm up here. For demonstration purposes. Around their arm there will be this this band wrapped all the way. It'll even go around one of their fingers, this little dark band, and with a little black cube. And as far as I'm aware, I believe the instructions for this practice to their people came from, and sorry about the artwork, I believe that came from this time period, or like in the immediate wake of it. But what's interesting about this practice, it's always been kind of mysterious, like what's going on with this practice. This is called tefillin, by the way, this thing. Hopefully I can spell this right in English. So this tefillin band that you pray with, it's always been sort of a mystery, like what's the point of this? In this little black cube in here, it actually inside, in the back, it has these little slits, these little slots for these little shelves inside. Or if like this was the back, it would be like these little shelves. And in each little slot, you have like a little script of Torah, like stuffed in each one. And it's always been sort of a mystery, like, why in their tradition God would have told them to start doing this. And I'm not going to say that what I'm saying is all of the explanation. These things tend to be multidimensional, but one of the layers of significance here is that this is like saying to mankind, okay, you've been doing the Tarzan thing for many, many, many thousands of years, but it's time to start doing the book thing. It's time to start writing stuff down and keeping records and keeping them accurate. Doing like checks. Trying to think of like a non-nerdy term. Just doing checks and protocols to ensure that the accuracy of these scripts and texts is preserved. And so that's like part of this, is it's saying like, okay, we were doing Tarzan, now we're doing books. Books are now going to be very important, and we're going to start recording these very important things starting now. Not that this was the beginning of records or anything, but it's as if it was being like very heavily iterated at this point. Like now we are doing books, and not just like stone tablet books, but like we're actually going to be writing and preserving those records, because that's the new phase that we need to move into, is record keeping and all that sort of thing. And it's interesting that you would wrap this band all around your body, all the way even literally to the tip of your finger, because this creates a very substantial psychomotive connection, and it really ingrains that into your mind when you have this psychophysical connection like this. Like, it really establishes this as something very important in your mind, because a lot of this stuff is like psychology. Like, just because it might come from the divine doesn't mean there isn't a very real psychological component to it, because we're still subject to the laws of physics and science and nature. So within this dimension, within this tesseract, however you want to look at it, so science still matters, psychology still matters, and this is a very powerful tool as far as psychologically establishing the importance of this and ingraining it and helping to burn it into your culture. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting little side note regarding this starting during the Sinai period, because that's what they were doing out there in the wilderness for 40 years, is they were basically getting good at writing down the Torah and keeping that record. It was okay, now we're doing books, and these are important. And again, I'm not saying that's 100% of the significance of this, but that's one very big dimension to it. But anyway, so manna would rain down overnight, and then, which I have not given away yet if you haven't already guessed where I'm going with that, and then quails would rain down in the evening. And at one point, there were so many quote-unquote quails that rained down on their camp that it was a cubit deep, which was from Pharaoh's elbow to the tip of his finger, and which also happens to be exactly the length of my arm, and I'm a pretty good bit above the average height for a male. So this is above most people's knees. So if it was a cubit deep, it would be up to starting into the thigh area of most people. And they said it was that deep all the way to every horizon that they could see. So that's an insane amount of quote-unquote quails that was raining down on their camp. And they also specifically said that these quails would be blown up from the sea. That's a very peculiar thing to say about quails. But I'm just going to cut to the chase. Quails don't hang out in exposed, dangerous areas where there's nothing for them to eat, much less exist in quantities that could bury you up to your knees to every horizon. There just are not that many quails in the world. But there is, however, a little buddy of the manna. Oh, sorry, not the manna. We haven't established that link yet. There is a little buddy of this food I'm talking about, that first marine food I'm talking about. There's another one that is also like a little pod, but is not like a rough little coriander seed like that first food. The second one is this really sleek little pod, really smooth, and it has this really cool feather design all across it on both sides, just that really sleek little motif of a feather pattern. And it's like a three-dimensional little pod. And if you saw that food out here, it's also a lighter food too. It's physically lighter. The first food I'm talking about out here is more like a rock. And so if you chuck that bad boy up into the troposphere, it would definitely come down first before that second food I'm talking about. The second food that's like a feather would fall slower, and it would come down sometime later, like the evening. But if you were, slaves over here for over a century, and before that you were living way out here up in like mountainous areas and stuff, and like these plains over here, and just like a pastoral people for, many generations, and then you got relocated over here, and then you got turned into a very lowly slave class after a while. Especially after like over a century of being a slave, your concept, your repertoire of references is going to be fairly limited. So when you try to like explain things and understand things, you're going to use references like everyone does, and like compare the new thing to something you're familiar with, but they're going to have a very limited range of things they're even familiar with. And so that's why, like, when they said that the manna was like coriander seeds, they weren't necessarily saying it was like little itty bitty tiny like a coriander, like that size. They're just saying it was like in discrete units, and it was rough like coriander. And so you just have to keep that in mind, that when they were describing something, they were describing it from a very limited range of knowledge and a very limited perspective, especially after being like literal slaves for many, many generations. Like you would have lost a lot during that process, a lot of like cultural, knowledge and things, but a lot of like little nuance and all that. But let me see here. Oh yeah, so if you saw that second food I'm talking about that looks like a little like feather pod, you would basically try to liken it to something you were familiar with. And since it basically looks like the torso of a little bird, it would be the most natural thing in the world for you to liken that food to a small bird. And what's the small birds that people are the most familiar with, like around the world? Quails. That's a very common little bird around many places. And so basically what I'm getting at here, I'm trying to hold details back be careful, but like basically what I'm getting at is it would be the most natural thing in the world for you to liken that second food I'm talking about to a quail, and to basically nickname it quails. And I'll just draw in that second food I'm talking about. And that sort of does the justice, but yeah, like I said, it would be the most natural thing in the world to nickname this quails, this marine food. And whereas the first one, or the first food I was describing, it comes in an envelope too, but its envelope is specifically sort of rough on the outside to be camouflaged, so to try and look like a rock so you don't see it, so the predators don't see it. And that's what I was going to say. So whereas this first food I was describing inside is like a white wafer like bread, this food inside is like red meat. And they were complaining, the Hebrews were complaining about the manna, saying that they were tired of eating manna, or as they called it, man, which to them was just meant, what is it? So they saw that and they're just like, what is it? Man. But then this looks a little more familiar. It's like, oh, hey, that's kind of like a little bird. And but this is like red meat inside. Like it's a wafer inside, like a nice little perfect wafer, but it's like red meat inside. And it has more of that like iron red meat, the red meat flavor to it. Oh, that's another fascinating thing. This is also completely non-sentient, even though it's 100% meat. This is the second food in the world that is completely meat, but completely non-sentient. So again, this is like a weird coincidence that these two like absolutely perfect, nutritionally perfect foods for the human body are also ethically flawless. That's really something to sort of contemplate. It's fascinating to me. But anyway, yeah, this inside, these quails, if you want to call this that, are like red meat. And so they were essentially satisfied when they got the quails out there in the desert, because they had so much manna, as we call it, that they got tired of it after a while, and they were like, we want meat, you know. And then God gave them quails, and then they were satisfied. And that's kind of fascinating, because that's exactly what it would be like if you were consuming these two foods, which again would have been out here in the billions, especially with this system putting a bunch of like fresh water back into this ecosystem and just like making the bunch of like fresh nutrients and causing like that marine life to just explode. And oh yeah, you might and I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this, that I'm leading up to the fact that this is a perfect description of manna, this food, and this is like a dead ringer for the quails as they described it. But if you don't like that, because a lot of people don't like the idea that that magical heavenly food would be some marine food, and if you don't like that, that's fine. But what's also worth noting, regardless of how you feel about that, is that you would have remnants of these things out here in the desert, because they were following this all up and down the coast for 40 years. They were following this system around, and they were getting manna the whole time. Whatever you think about what that manna was and where exactly it came from, they were getting it the whole time, and they were getting their quails the whole time for like millions of people for 40 years. So, in that the manna came with a lot of jewelry. So a lot of that's going to be ending up, if it's falling from heaven, a lot of it's going to be ending up in like random places, like nooks and crannies where they just like never found it, or just kind of like stayed out there. And so if you go and do a bunch of archaeology out here, you are going to find just unreal quantities of jewelry and, you know, quail remnants, whether they be quail bones or this, out there in just like stupendous, prodigious quantities all over the place, just gargantuan amounts of this stuff. Not even, or you know, manna and quails, like not even very far beneath the soil, depending on, you know, the local rates of deposition and stuff like that. And it also says that, you know, when they got back to Canaan over here, that they kept a sample of the manna around for centuries in a jar. And it doesn't say the jewelry part of it. It just says they kept the manna in a jar, a sample of it, for centuries, so that they could periodically like take it out and like remind themselves, like, hey, look, you know, when times get hard, just remember God will provide. And so they kept that around forever. But what that tells you is that manna can be kept around for centuries. And if it can be kept around for centuries, it can be kept around for a lot longer. So whatever it was, whatever you want to believe about what it was, you're going to find it all over the place when you just go out here and start doing a bunch of archaeology. There will be more than any throng of people could ever possibly find in a million lifetimes probably, there would just be copious amounts of evidence for manna and quails in the desert wherever the Exodus happened, you know, presumably here, but wherever it happened, there will be just unreal quantities of it all throughout that wilderness area. And so if you want to really put like the final bow on this whole thing of the smoking gun to establish this, that's how you do it. You go do the archaeology, you go do the Indiana Jonesing, and you look for what's out there, and you let the evidence be the final word on exactly what manna was and what the quails were. But either way, even if you're a hardcore skeptic about it all, I've still shown that there are two things that precisely match exactly those crazy descriptions that they provided. And by the way, a lot of people have gotten a completely wrong impression about this food because it does have that real soft saline water inside with the wafer, and that soft water is really slippery, so they've gotten the wrong idea about the texture of this wafer. This wafer is just meat in salt water, just meat in salt water, you know, that's all it is. But a lot of people have gotten a totally skewed idea of what this is all about, and you know, they haven't been raised in cultures with these types of foods, so they don't, you know, it's sad, but they don't have a proper appreciation for just how phenomenal these are. And once you just like get past that cultural misconception, you do see there are giant festivals all around the world for just this one food. That's how epic this food is. And if you want to go join those festivals, you know, you can. Those are oyster festivals. This food is so much more epic than I can describe in one sitting. And before New York was the Big Apple, it was the Big Oyster. They were about it. They were crackers for their clackers. And these miracles over here are mussels. Again, phenomenal. You can get that whole red meat experience, and you can get it with all the brain food that the land foods don't have, and you can get it in an ethically flawless way. So, and we can use these, like we can cultivate these, we can, you know, like the Dutch and the Netherlands have these phenomenal glass houses where they grow like huge quantities of food. They're like the world's second largest food producer. And they have these like really amazing like glass houses or greenhouses, like really beautiful, out like all around the countryside. And inside they grow like huge amounts of food. And you could just use setups like that to cultivate stuff like this if you wanted. And you could have like flawless control over the quality, and you could make these like as absurdly clean and kosher as you want, because that's what kosher is all about. It's just kosher is cleanliness. So yeah, you could make that as ridiculously kosher as you want. And you know, we can use these to make other foods. We can grow these up, like we could breed these up like super physically massive if we want, like the giant Venus clam. And like we could like vastly exceed the cost effectiveness of other sources of meat. We could take this into space. We could do anything. And there's no awareness, so these things don't care, you know. They don't care where they are, what's going on around them. And you can make all sorts of stuff. Like I've had like sausages and stuff made out of these, and it's phenomenal. But yeah, so these are like miracle foods in themselves. Even if you don't want to think that that's what was coming down over here, these are still like otherworldly. They're so amazing. And so yeah, there was like one more thing I wanted to mention about these guys. But anyway, there's your entire Exodus event. That's 100% of it. No stone left unturned. No anomaly left unexplained. There's all of it. So even the most hardcore skeptic now can see that they were indeed telling 100% the truth, regardless of what you think about any other subjects or any other events or whatever. This larger-than-life event did indeed happen, and we can confirm this all over the place with all sorts of stuff. You know, even looking for ancient channels, and there's like so many things we can do to like investigate this further and just learn more about it and locate like precisely where the real Mount Sinai is, and you know, presuming God is cool with that. But anyway, so yeah, there you go. There is the entire Exodus.